For decades, Cliff Richard was the smiling face of British pop, a charming young star whose songs defined generations and whose image seemed untouchable. But behind the bright lights and chart success lay private sorrows, broken relationships, and public betrayals that nearly destroyed him. What began as a story of triumph slowly turned into one of the most painful sagas in British entertainment history. Today, we retrace the steps of Cliff Richard, the victories, the heartbreak, and the moment that forced him into the shadows. From his early days in India to his rise in Britain and the reinvention that saved his career, this is the story of a man who never stopped fighting to stay true to himself. This is the real Cliff Richard, a child of India. From Lucknow to London, Cliff Richard did not begin life in London, as many fans assumed. He was born Harry Roger Webb in Lucknow during the final years of British India. His earliest memories were of warmth, sunlight, and the gentle comfort of a life far removed from post-war Britain. But history soon tore that world apart. As the push for independence grew louder, the Webb family packed their belongings and boarded a crowded ship back to England. The long voyage brought them to a country still scarred by war, where rationing was harsh and opportunities were scarce. In a small home in Hertfordshire, Harry learned quickly that comfort was gone. The contrast between his early childhood and his new reality left a deep mark. Out of that dislocation came a fierce desire to prove himself, and music became his escape. The birth of Cliff Richard, a name, a new life. American rock and roll hit Harry like a revelation. Elvis Presley and Little Richard became his heroes, and their raw energy awakened something inside him. He began to dream not of fitting into his new surroundings, but of standing out. By his late teens, Harry Webb no longer existed. He re-emerged as Cliff Richard, a name chosen to project strength and permanence, while nodding to the energy of his musical idols. Alongside his backing group, first called The Drifters and later The Shadows, he recorded his debut single, Move It. Unlike the polite pop of the time, it was sharp, rough-edged, and unapologetically rebellious. Within weeks, Cliff was hailed as Britain's first true rock and roll star. Teenage hysteria swept the country, with fans fainting and screaming in scenes previously only heard about in America. Suddenly, Cliff Richard was no longer just another singer. He was a cultural shift. The Christian icon, faith over fame. The 1960s were years when rebellion was celebrated and pop idols were expected to live on the edge. Cliff Richard, however, made a decision that stunned everyone. At the height of his fame, he stood before thousands at a massive gathering led by American evangelist Billy Graham and publicly declared himself a Christian. It wasn't a private choice. It was a national declaration. Fans were left in disbelief. The man they had seen as Britain's answer to Elvis suddenly seemed to be turning his back on the image that had made him a star. Record executives panicked, whispering that his career was finished. Some believed he would leave music entirely. Cliff himself considered it. He feared he could not reconcile faith and the stage, but he did something no one expected. He stayed, and he refused to abandon either calling. He merged faith with fame, becoming the first major British pop star to live openly by his beliefs while still competing on the charts. The price of success: loss, responsibility, and sacrifice. This transformation came with a heavy personal cost. At 21, Cliff's father died suddenly, leaving him responsible for his mother and sisters. Years later, he endured the long, painful decline of his mother as she slipped into Alzheimer's. These experiences deepened his sense of duty, but they also meant sacrificing personal happiness. Relationships faltered. One romance ended in a heartbreaking letter where he confessed he had to choose career and family over marriage. Other relationships with actresses and dancers were short-lived, undone by his growing fame and the responsibilities he carried. Yet, despite the sacrifices, Cliff held firm. While the Beatles and other groups stormed the world, Cliff endured by being true to himself. He was no longer just a pop idol. He had become a man defined as much by his faith and resilience as by his music. The love that never was. Olivia Newton-John. Among all the romances in Cliff Richard's life, one story overshadowed the rest. A love that never had a chance to begin. In the early 1970s, Cliff invited young Australian singer Olivia Newton-John onto his television show. Their chemistry was undeniable. Their voices blended seamlessly. Their friendship blossomed. For Cliff, something deeper began to grow. But Olivia's heart was already elsewhere. She was in a complicated relationship with Bruce Welch, Cliff's bandmate from the Shadows. Their affair was turbulent, and Bruce was still married when it began. For 5 years, they were engaged, but marriage never came. When Olivia finally left, Bruce spiraled into depression and self-harm. Through it all, Cliff remained silent, torn between loyalty to a friend and his unspoken love. Decades later, he admitted he was in love with her, but his chance had passed. He chose not to interfere, even though his heart broke in silence. A friendship that lasted a lifetime. Despite the heartbreak, Cliff and Olivia never drifted apart. They continued to sing together for more than 40 years, recording the duet Suddenly for the film Xanadu and performing classics around the world. Cliff often said Olivia had a grace no one else could match. Their final duet came during his 75th birthday concerts at the Royal Albert Hall, where they sang Suddenly one last time. Neither knew it would be their final performance together. Weeks before Olivia's death in 2022, Cliff called her. She sounded cheerful, hiding the pain of her long battle with cancer. Cliff later wrote that he never imagined that phone call would be their last. When she passed, he refused to say death. Instead, he said she had simply stopped living, an attempt to describe the silence she left behind. It was a tragedy that remained with him forever. Collapse and reinvention. The 1970s turning point. By the mid-1970s, Cliff Richard's career seemed to be fading. For the first time since his debut, he went an entire year without placing a song in the charts. Younger acts were dominating, and Cliff, once the rebellious face of rock and roll, appeared outdated. But just when critics were ready to write his obituary, he returned with something no one expected. In 1976, he released Devil Woman, a dark, hard-edged song about curses and strange encounters. It was a sharp departure from his wholesome image. The track climbed into the top 10 in Britain and America and sold more than 2 million copies. Suddenly, Cliff was no longer dismissed as yesterday's news. He was embraced by a new generation. Legends like Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, and Elton John were seen supporting his comeback. It wasn't just a hit, it was a rebirth. The song, the industry rejected. The Millennium Prayer. By the late 1990s, Cliff had proven himself a survivor, yet the music industry seemed determined to push him aside. When he released the Millennium Prayer, a powerful setting of the Lord's Prayer, to the tune of Auld Lang Syne, radio stations reacted brutally. BBC refused to play it, claiming it wasn't relevant for younger audiences. Some DJs mocked him, calling him outdated. But Cliff's fans refused to accept defeat. They rallied, buying copies in droves and spreading the word. Against all expectations, the single hit #1 and stayed there for 3 weeks. It was his 14th UK #1, arriving 40 years after his first. The success proved that public support mattered more than industry approval. The song became a movement, a protest against the gatekeepers who tried to silence him. It showed that Cliff Richard was still loved. The raid that broke a legend, the 2014 scandal. In 2014, Cliff Richard was at home in Portugal when he watched live TV footage of helicopters circling his house in Berkshire. Police were searching his belongings. It looked like a burglary, but it was far worse. South Yorkshire police had launched an investigation into allegations that Cliff had assaulted a man during a Billy Graham rally in the 1980s. The BBC had been tipped off and broadcast the raid live. The claim quickly fell apart. The accuser described a room that didn't exist at the time, and officers assigned to guard Cliff were never interviewed. Despite this, police pursued the investigation for nearly 2 years, spending hundreds of thousands of pounds. The impact on Cliff was devastating. He became reclusive, losing weight, suffering shingles, and struggling with insomnia. His home no longer felt safe. Everyday life was put on hold. The BBC even entered their coverage into an awards competition while the case was ongoing. A legal victory that couldn't heal. Eventually, prosecutors announced that no charges would be brought, but Cliff was not satisfied. Insufficient evidence was not enough. He wanted the truth spelled out. There was no evidence at all. In 2018, he finally found justice in court. The High Court ruled that his privacy had been violated unlawfully and sensationally, awarding him damages. The ruling forced changes in how the British press could cover unproven allegations, but no amount of money could erase the damage. Cliff said he felt smeared not only by the police, but by the BBC. His career and reputation, built over 60 years, had been reduced to a raid, a rumor, and a media circus. He would never fully escape the scars. It was the darkest chapter of his life. Outrow, a legend. Still standing. Cliff Richard's story is one of dazzling triumphs and devastating trials. A man who gave his life to music only to be betrayed by the institutions that once celebrated him. Through love lost, faith tested, and reputation nearly destroyed, he survived with resilience few could match. He rose from a displaced child in post-war Britain to a global star, reinvented himself again and again, and fought back against public humiliation with the same strength that made him a legend. His legacy is undeniable. Over 250 million records sold, honors including a knighthood, and a lifetime of music that still touches millions. But the true story is the human one, a man who endured pain in silence and still chose to keep singing. Do you believe Cliff Richard deserved better from the media? Comment yes or no below. And if this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share.